Louisiana, August 9, 2000. The fluorescent lights of St. Martin Parish General Hospital buzzed with their familiar electric hum as Rebecca "Becky" Dufresne peeled off her latex gloves for the final time that Wednesday night. The humid August air pressed against the hospital windows like a heavy blanket, and even at 11:47 p.m., the temperature hadn't dropped below 85 degrees. Becky's white nursing shoes squeaked against the polished linoleum as she made her way to the time clock, her auburn hair pulled back in the same neat ponytail she'd worn for the past 6 years of working the evening shift. At 29, Becky had already earned the respect of doctors and patients alike at the small hospital that served the rural communities scattered throughout St. Martin Parish. Her colleagues knew her as the nurse who never missed a shift, who stayed late to comfort families in the waiting room, and who kept a small notebook where she jotted down reminders about each patient's preferences. Mrs. Boudreau liked her ice chips crushed fine. Mr. Thibodeau needed his medication with crackers to settle his stomach. "Another double?" asked Sandra Melançon, the night shift supervisor, as she watched Becky gather her purse from the employee locker room. The two women had developed an easy friendship over the years, bonding over their shared love of café au lait and their frustration with the hospital's outdated equipment. "Dr. Peterson needed coverage for the cardiac unit," Becky replied, though something in her voice seemed different that night, quieter, more distant than usual. "Mrs. Como in room 304 is still having chest pains. I stayed to make sure her EKG was stable." Sandra noticed that Becky's hands trembled slightly as she signed out on the patient log. "You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." Becky paused at the doorway, her keys already in her hand. For a moment, she seemed to consider saying something more, her brown eyes scanning the empty hallway behind Sandra. The hospital felt different at this hour. Shadows stretched longer, and the usual daytime chatter had given way to the soft beeping of monitors and the distant hum of the air conditioning struggling against the Louisiana heat. "Just tired," Becky finally said, forcing a smile. "See you tomorrow." Those were the last words anyone at St. Martin Parish General Hospital would ever hear from Rebecca Dufresne. The security camera at the hospital's employee exit captured Becky walking to her white 1997 Honda Accord at 11:52 p.m. She paused beside her car for nearly 30 seconds, looking back at the hospital's main entrance as if expecting someone to follow her. Then she got in, started the engine, and drove into the thick Louisiana night. The 15-mile drive from the hospital to Becky's small rental house on Elm Street should have taken 20 minutes on the winding back roads that cut through sugar-cane fields and cypress swamps. Her sister Caroline, who lived just 2 blocks away, had planned to wait up for her. They'd made plans to have coffee together before Caroline's early morning shift at the bank, but Becky never made it home. At 6:30 a.m. the next morning, Caroline found Becky's white Honda Accord abandoned on the shoulder of Highway 31, just 50 yards from the muddy banks of Bayou Teche. The driver's side door was unlocked, the keys still dangling from the ignition. On the passenger seat sat a half-empty thermos of coffee, still slightly warm to the touch, and Becky's purse with her wallet, ID, and $43 in cash untouched inside. The only sign of disturbance was a small crack in the rear window, and what appeared to be fresh scratches along the driver's side door handle, as if someone had grabbed it roughly while it was being opened. St. Martin Parish, August 2000, January 2001. The news of Becky Dufresne's disappearance spread through the tight-knit communities of St. Martin Parish like ripples across still water. Within hours of Caroline's frantic call to the sheriff's office, volunteer search teams had formed at the parish community center, their pickup trucks loaded with rope, flashlights, and thermoses of strong coffee. The local Cajun radio station, KBON, interrupted its regular programming to broadcast Becky's description every hour: 5'4", auburn hair, brown eyes, last seen wearing navy blue scrubs and white nursing shoes. Sheriff Paul Guidry had served St. Martin Parish for 18 years, and in all that time, he'd never encountered a disappearance quite like this one. Missing persons in rural Louisiana usually fell into predictable categories: teenage runaways heading to New Orleans, domestic disputes that turned violent, or tragic accidents in the treacherous waters of the Atchafalaya Basin. But Becky Dufresne didn't fit any of those patterns. She wasn't the type to just up and leave, Caroline told Detective Ray Boudreau during her first interview at the sheriff's office. Caroline's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she clutched a photograph of her and Becky taken just 3 weeks earlier at their cousin's wedding in Lafayette. "Becky called me every single day, We had coffee together every Thursday morning for 6 years straight. She never missed a shift at the hospital, never missed Sunday Mass at St. John's. The initial search focused on the area around Bayou Teche, where Becky's car had been found. Teams of volunteers waded through the murky water, pushing aside curtains of Spanish moss and searching among the cypress roots for any sign of the missing nurse. The August heat was brutal. Temperatures soared past 95 degrees, and the humidity made the air feel thick enough to drink. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds, and more than one searcher had to be treated for heat exhaustion. For 3 days, the search continued from dawn to dusk. Local shrimp boats dragged nets through deeper sections of the bayou. The Louisiana State Police brought in helicopters to survey the vast expanse of wetlands and sugarcane fields that stretched for miles in every direction. Cadaver dogs from Baton Rouge worked the shoreline, their handlers watching for any sign that the animals had caught a scent. They found nothing. "It's like she just vanished into thin air," Sheriff Guidry told the local newspaper, the St. Martin Parish Messenger, after the official search was called off. "We've covered every square mile within a 20-mile radius of where her car was found. If she's out there, we would have found something by now." But Caroline refused to accept that explanation. She organized her own search parties, recruiting friends from church, former classmates from nursing school, and anyone else willing to spend their weekends combing through the endless maze of backroads and waterways that crisscrossed the parish. She printed flyers with Becky's photograph and posted them at every grocery store, gas station, and restaurant from Breaux Bridge to Morgan City. As the weeks turned to months, the initial surge of community support began to fade. The volunteer search teams dwindled to just a handful of die-hard supporters. The sheriff's department, stretched thin with limited resources, quietly moved Becky's case to the back burner. New crimes demanded attention: a convenience store robbery in St. Martinville, a domestic violence incident that left a woman hospitalized, the ongoing battle against drug trafficking along the Interstate 10 corridor. At St. Martin Parish General Hospital, Becky's absence created a void that was impossible to fill. The nursing staff struggled to cover her shifts, and patients frequently asked about the kind nurse with the auburn hair who always remembered their names. Hospital Administrator Janet LeBlanc hired 2 new nurses to replace Becky, but neither stayed longer than 6 months. The evening shift felt different without her steady presence and gentle humor. Dr. Henry LeBlanc, the senior attending physician who had worked closely with Becky for several years, seemed particularly affected by her disappearance. Colleagues noticed that he had become more withdrawn and irritable in the months following her vanishing. He snapped at nurses for minor mistakes, worked longer hours, and often seemed lost in thought during staff meetings. Dr. LeBlanc and Becky had a good working relationship, Sandra Melançon later told investigators. He always requested her for his patients when she was on duty, said she was the most competent nurse he'd ever worked with. After she disappeared, he just wasn't the same. Christmas of 2000 came and went without any new leads. Caroline spent the holiday distributing updated flyers with a different photograph, this one showing Becky in her nursing uniform, smiling beside a decorated Christmas tree at the hospital's holiday party just 8 months before she vanished. The image would become iconic in the years that followed, appearing in newspaper articles and on television news reports about unsolved disappearances in rural Louisiana. By January 2001, the official investigation had effectively stalled. Becky's case file, containing witness statements, photographs of her abandoned car, and reports from the unsuccessful searches, was transferred to the Louisiana State Police Cold Case Unit in Baton Rouge. For all practical purposes, the search for Rebecca Dufresne was over, but for Caroline it was just beginning. St. Martin Parish, September 2025. 25 years after Becky Dufresne's disappearance, the old Dufresne family home on Elm Street stood empty and weathered, its white paint peeling in long strips that curled in the humid Louisiana air. Caroline had finally made the difficult decision to sell the property after their elderly mother passed away the previous winter. The new owners, Mark and Jennifer Tran, a young couple from Baton Rouge, had purchased the house site unseen at an estate sale, drawn by its reasonable price and the large lot that included a detached garage and storage shed. It was Jennifer who first suggested they renovate the old shed that sat at the back of the property, half hidden behind a tangle of honeysuckle vines and overgrown fig trees. The structure was solid, built from heart pine sometime in the 1940s, but decades of Louisiana weather had left it looking more like a relic than a usable storage space. "We could turn it into a workshop," Jennifer told her husband, as they surveyed the property on their first weekend as homeowners. "Maybe add some windows, run electricity out there." Mark was less enthusiastic. The shed's single door hung crooked on rusted hinges, and the interior smelled of motor oil, mildew, and something else he couldn't quite identify, something stale and forgotten. But Jennifer had her heart set on the project, and by October, they had hired a local contractor to help with the renovation. It was while clearing out decades of accumulated junk that contractor Eddie Hebert made the discovery that would change everything. Hidden beneath a pile of rotting cardboard boxes and rusted lawn equipment, wedged into the far corner of the shed behind an old workbench, sat a metal toolbox that had somehow escaped the moisture and decay that had claimed everything else in the building. "Y'all might want to see this," Eddie called to the Trans, who were inside the house sorting through their own renovation plans. The toolbox was heavy, its red paint faded to a dull rust color, and it took some effort to work it free from its hiding place. When Eddie finally managed to pry open the corroded latches, he found something he hadn't expected. Inside, wrapped in what had once been a clear plastic bag, was a stack of cassette tapes. Each tape was carefully labeled in neat handwriting. Shift Notes, July 1999. Shift Notes, October 1999. Shift Notes, March 2000. The most recent tape was dated August 2000, just days before Becky Dufresne had vanished. Jennifer immediately recognized the significance of the dates. Everyone in St. Martin Parish knew the story of the missing nurse, even newcomers like herself. The case had become local legend, discussed in hushed tones at church socials and family gatherings, a cautionary tale about how even the safest small towns could harbor dark secrets. The Trans called the sheriff's office that same afternoon. Detective Miles Gauthier had been with the St. Martin Parish Sheriff's Department for 8 years, but he had never worked on the Dufresne case. He knew the basic facts. Every cop in South Louisiana did, but the disappearance had occurred years before he joined the force. As he drove out to the Elm Street house to examine the discovery, he wasn't sure what to expect. The cassette tapes looked ordinary enough, the kind that had been common in cars and boomboxes during the late 1990s. But when Detective Gauthier played the first tape on an old cassette player he'd borrowed from the evidence room, he heard something that made him stop breathing. It was Becky Dufresne's voice, clear and unmistakable, recorded sometime in the months before her disappearance. But these weren't medical notes or work reminders. They were something far more troubling. "There, July 15th, 1999, Becky's voice began, speaking in a low, careful tone as if she were afraid of being overheard. "Dr. LeBlanc called me into his office again today. 3rd time this month. He wanted to discuss what he called patient care protocols, but that's not what this is about. I know what I saw in Mrs. Richards' chart. The medication doses don't match what was actually administered. Someone's been changing the records." Detective Gauthier felt a chill run down his spine as he continued listening. Tape after tape revealed a pattern of increasingly concerning incidents at St. Martin Parish General Hospital. Becky spoke of pressure from Dr. LeBlanc to falsify patient records, of mysterious late-night meetings in the hospital basement, and of her growing fear that she was being watched. "March 3rd, 2000, her voice continued on another tape. "Found another discrepancy today. Mr. Boudreau's prescription records show he received 30 Percocet tablets, but I only gave him 10. The rest are missing from the pharmacy count. When I mentioned it to Dr. LeBlanc, he told me to mind my own business, said some things were above my pay grade. I don't know what to do. If I report this to the state board, I could lose my job. But if I don't, patients could get hurt." The final tape, dated August 7th, 2000, just 2 days before Becky's disappearance, was the most disturbing of all. "I can't keep quiet anymore," Becky's voice said, strained with exhaustion and fear. "I found the files Dr. LeBlanc has been hiding in the basement storage room, prescription records going back 3 years, all falsified. He's been selling painkillers and sedatives using fake patient names and forged prescriptions. Thousands of pills, maybe tens of thousands. I confronted him about it today and he threatened me, said I needed to forget what I thought I saw, or there would be consequences. I'm scared. If anyone finds these tapes, please tell my sister I didn't run away." I was trying to tell the truth. Detective Gauthier sat in silence for several minutes after the final tape ended, processing what he had just heard. Then he reached for his phone and called the Louisiana State Police Cold Case Unit. After 25 years, the investigation into Rebecca Dufresne's disappearance was officially reopened. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, October 2025. The Louisiana State Police headquarters in Baton Rouge hummed with activity on the Tuesday morning when Detective Miles Gauthier arrived with a box containing Becky Dufresne's cassette tapes and a warrant to search the basement of St. Martin Parish General Hospital. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, who headed the cold case unit, had reviewed the audio recordings and agreed that they represented the first significant break in the case since 2000. 25 years, Lieutenant Chen said, as she studied crime scene photographs from Becky's abandoned car. That's a long time for someone to carry a secret. The search of the hospital basement revealed exactly what Becky's tapes had suggested. Hidden behind a false wall in an unused storage room, investigators found boxes of prescription pads, patient files with altered medication records, and a ledger detailing transactions that dated back to 1998. The handwriting in the ledger matched samples taken from Dr. Henry LeBlanc's medical files. At 71, Dr. LeBlanc had been retired for nearly 10 years. He lived quietly in a modest ranch house in Lafayette with his wife of 48 years, spending his days tending to a small garden and volunteering at a free clinic for uninsured patients. Neighbors knew him as a soft-spoken man who never missed Sunday Mass and still made house calls for elderly patients who couldn't afford to see a doctor. When Detective Gauthier and Lieutenant Chen knocked on his door on October 15, 2025, Dr. LeBlanc answered wearing a faded LSU t-shirt and gardening gloves, his white hair thinning but his hands still steady. He looked exactly like what he was, a retired country doctor enjoying his golden years. Dr. LeBlanc, Detective Gauthier said, showing his badge. We'd like to ask you some questions about Rebecca Dufresne. The color drained from the old man's face. He removed his gardening gloves slowly, his hands beginning to shake. I wondered when this day would come, he said quietly. I've been waiting for 25 years. What followed was not the dramatic confession that television crime shows might suggest. Dr. LeBlanc didn't break down in tears or offer elaborate excuses. Instead, he simply sat in his living room, surrounded by photographs of his children and grandchildren, and told the truth with the same clinical precision he had once used to diagnose patients. It started small, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. A few extra pills here and there for patients who were in real pain but couldn't afford their medications. I told myself I was helping people, but then I needed money for my daughter's college tuition and my wife's medical bills when she had cancer. The pharmaceutical companies were making billions off people's suffering. I convinced myself I was just redistributing the wealth. By 1999, Dr. LeBlanc was systematically falsifying prescription records and selling excess painkillers and sedatives to dealers in Lafayette and Baton Rouge. The operation had grown far beyond his original intentions, generating nearly $50,000 in illegal income over 3 years. Becky started noticing the discrepancies in early 1999. Dr. LeBlanc continued. She was too good a nurse, too careful with details. I tried to transfer her to different shifts, different departments, but she kept finding inconsistencies. I knew it was only a matter of time before she reported me. The confrontation that Becky had referenced in her final tape had occurred on August 8, 2000, in Dr. LeBlanc's office after the evening shift. Becky had brought copies of the altered prescription records and demanded that he stop the illegal activity or she would report him to the state medical board. She gave me 24 hours to confess to the hospital administration, Dr. LeBlanc said. Said she didn't want to destroy my career, but she couldn't let patients be put at risk. She was always thinking about the patients first. On the night of August 9th, Dr. LeBlanc had waited in the hospital parking lot for Becky to finish her shift. When she emerged at 11:52 p.m., he had followed her in his own car, flashing his headlights to get her attention. Becky had pulled over on Highway 31, assuming there was some kind of medical emergency. I just wanted to talk to her, Dr. LeBlanc said, his voice cracking for the first time. To convince her to give me more time, to let me figure out a way to make things right, but she wouldn't listen. She said she'd already made up her mind. The argument that followed had escalated quickly. Dr. LeBlanc claimed that he had never intended for anyone to get hurt, but when Becky had tried to get back in her car to leave, he had grabbed her arm. She had fallen, striking her head on the car's door frame. She didn't get up, Dr. LeBlanc whispered. I checked for a pulse, tried CPR, everything I knew how to do, but it was too late. I sat there for maybe an hour, trying to figure out what to do. If I called for help, my career would be over. My family would be destroyed. So I moved her. Dr. LeBlanc had driven Becky's body to a remote section of the Atchafalaya Basin, an area he knew from childhood fishing trips with his father. He had buried her near an old levee, in a spot he thought would never be found. Then he had returned to move her car, abandoning it near Bayou Teche to create the illusion that she had disappeared near the water. "And I thought about confessing every day for 25 years, Dr. LeBlanc said, as Detective Gauthier placed him under arrest. "Every patient I treated, every prayer I said, every time I saw her sister at the grocery store, I knew I was living a lie." 3 weeks later, using GPS coordinates provided by Dr. LeBlanc, search teams found Rebecca Dufresne's remains exactly where he had said they would be. Along with the bones, they recovered a small silver locket that Caroline had given Becky for her 21st birthday, engraved with the words, "Sisters Forever." Caroline attended Dr. LeBlanc's sentencing hearing in December 2025. She sat in the front row as the 71-year-old man was sentenced to 15 years in prison for manslaughter and evidence tampering. When given the opportunity to address the court, Caroline spoke directly to the man who had stolen her sister from her. "You took 25 years of my life," she said, her voice steady but filled with pain. 25 years of wondering, of hoping, of never being able to say goodbye. But you also gave me something today. You gave me the truth. And you gave me my sister back." The case officially closed on January 15th of 2026, exactly 25 years and 5 months after Becky Dufresne had disappeared. The final entry in the police file included a transcript of her last recorded words, found on the cassette tape dated August 7th, 2000. "If anyone finds this, please tell my sister I didn't run. I was trying to tell the truth." On a quiet Sunday morning in February 2026, Caroline Dufresne stood beside a new granite headstone in St. John's Catholic Cemetery, finally able to visit her sister's grave. The headstone bore a simple inscription, "Rebecca Marie Dufresne, 1971-2000, beloved sister, devoted nurse, truth teller." In the distance, the bells of St. John's Church rang out across the Louisiana countryside, their sound carrying across the same fields and bayous where Becky had vanished on that humid August night so many years before. The truth had taken 25 years to surface, but it had finally found its way home. As Caroline placed fresh flowers beside the headstone, she could almost hear her sister's voice one last time, carried on the warm Louisiana breeze, clear, determined, and finally at peace.